The Horsemen of the Apocalypse are some of the strongest devils in Chainsaw Man, but with this strength comes a good amount of complexity, both in terms of abilities and personality. So I thought it would be helpful to explain the 5 women that make up the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Let's go in the order the Horsewomen are introduced, meaning we'll be starting with Makima, aka the Control Devil. Makima served as the main antagonist of Chainsaw Man Part 1, pulling the strings from behind the scenes for the first 2/3 and then becoming a truly devilish antagonist for the last couple arcs. She is, without a doubt, one of the strongest devils we see in Chainsaw Man, and this is mostly a result of her main ability, which is controlling people that she believes to be weaker than herself. This control can be applied to any being known to us, including everything from devils, hybrids, and fiends to regular humans and animals, and for the most part is absolute. The only time her control was ever broken was by the Angel Devil, who briefly escaped it after she forced Aki to make a contract with her. These contracts are how she gains abilities, as once a contract is made with Makima, she can use it whenever she likes. And if this contract is made with a person with a devil contract, she gains control of that contract as well. Through this method, she was able to develop contracts with a ton of devils, so I'm going to briefly go over them all. Makima has a contract with the Angel Devil, allowing her to trade human lifespan to create powerful weapons. The most expensive weapon we see her create is with 1,000 years of usage, but there's likely no limit on it as long as there is human life to be expended on the weapon. Next is her contract with the Spider Devil, which acts as an extra pair of eyes for her, as well as a competent fighter. Most importantly though, she was able to sacrifice the Spider Devil in order to travel to Hell, as we saw in the International Assassins arc. Another devil she is contracted with is the Zombie Devil, which she uses to create a horde of zombies. Pretty self-explanatory there. She also made use of devil contracts from dead public safety agents that submitted to her, like Aki's Future Devil, which allowed her to see the future in some capacity, Sawatari's Snake Devil, allowing her to transport other devils in the mouth of the snake, and Kurosei and Tendo's Punishment Devil, which we don't have an overt explanation on, but it's likely these human things. All of these abilities, minus Zombie, were used in tandem to easily defeat the 20% Gun Devil, but we're still not done with her contracts, because we haven't talked about her most important contract, the contract she has with the Prime Minister of Japan, as this one basically grants her immortality. It allows her to transfer any injuries she sustains to Japanese citizens in proportional illness and injuries. This basically means that as long as there are Japanese citizens alive, she cannot die, unless her regenerative powers are inhibited for one reason or another, and she is then slowly eaten over the course of a few months by a person who loves her. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In addition to these contracts, Makima also had control over the 7 weapon hybrids. These were the Bomb Devil, aka Reese, who could use parts of her body to create explosions, Katana Man, who could go really fast sometimes, the Longsword, Spear, and Whip hybrids, all of which we haven't seen a ton of, the Flamethrower hybrid Barum, who could set things on fire, surprising I know, and lastly the Bow Devil Quan Chi, who was the first devil hunter and is also more dangerous in her human form than a number of these hybrids are post-transformation. I miss this lesbian. As far as I know, that is all the contracts she had, but if you think I'm missing any, please let me know in the comments down below. For now though, it's time to move on to her other abilities. That's right, we're still not done. In addition to all these abilities she gained through devil contracts, she also has a number of abilities through controlling animals, such as stealing their sight and hearing. These essentially allow her to hear any conversation happening anywhere on the planet, but that can be avoided by using written communication. She also seemingly has the ability to teleport using rats, as we saw in the Bomb Devil arc, and likely also has the ability to steal the sight of birds as well, based on the Katana Man arc. This brings me to yet another one of her abilities, Force Manipulation. Yeah, this one doesn't have an established name, so I'm just using the name it was given on the wiki. Force Manipulation essentially allows Makima to control some invisible force. It's a pretty common ability among stronger devils, as others like the Darkness Devil and the War Devil, who we will be talking about soon, make use of it as well. In Makima's hands, we see it used in 2 main ways. The first is during the Katana Man arc, when she uses it to remotely squash opponents in the palm of her hand. In order to use this form of it, she needs to know the names of the targets and also trade the life of another person for each usage. The other, and more memorable usage, was Bang, where she makes a finger gun and uses said finger gun to blast an opponent away from her or blast a hole in their body if they're considerably weaker than her. And lastly, for abilities, Makima is also an expert in hand-to-hand combat, as we saw her beat a weakened Pochita pretty easily, and she is of course highly intelligent and highly manipulative even without devil contracts. At this point in the video, you might be thinking, Chris, what are you talking about? Control isn't a Horseman of the Apocalypse? And you would be right. kind of. In Japanese, the name for Makima's devil is Shihai, which can be translated to control, but can also be translated to conquest, the horseman of the apocalypse that was later replaced by pestilence. But there are even notes of pestilence in Makima's character due to her relation with rats. When she was alive, Makima was likely the second strongest horseman behind only Death, but it seems even Death had some reason to avoid Makima, as she never made an appearance in the series until after Makima's death. Was this likely just for the sake of storytelling? Yeah, but the in-world inferences for this avoidance by Death are interesting, so I do want to talk about them, but I think it would make more sense to talk about them during the Death section rather than right now. I'm pretty sure that's everything there is to say about Makima, which means we can move on not from the Control Devil, but from Makima, because we need to briefly talk about Nayuta. Nayuta is the reincarnation of the Control Devil that appeared after Makima was killed by Denji. Devils with the strength of the Horsemen always get reincarnated unless they are eaten by Chainsaw Man. This is of course due to humanity's perpetual fears of these concepts. Despite this perpetual fear, Nayuta is far weaker than Makima was as the Control Devil, having a far more limited capacity to control people and also being physically weaker due to her being a child. That being said, she wasn't powerless, as she did have the ability to control others, as we saw her control Yoru in Denji's apartment. She was also able to erase the memories of Asa and Yoru after this incident, but there is definitely a low limit to her power as she failed to control Barum, which is interesting. Does this mean Nayuta thought Yoru was weaker than her? Was she controlling Asa instead? Who knows? And frankly, it doesn't really matter, as Nayuta is now likely dead. There is a possibility she comes back in some capacity, but if anything, that return would probably only serve to hurt Denji. Okay, now we can move on from control. So it's time to talk about the War Devil, aka Yoru. The War Devil serves a complicated purpose in Chainsaw Man Part 2, acting as both a major antagonist and kind of a protagonist, as well as sort of a love interest and also the antagonist of another love interest. She's got a lot going on, and the reason she can hold so many roles in Part 2 is because she's sharing a physical body with Asa, the new secondary protagonist of Part 2. Yoru took over part of Asa's body after she was killed by the class president at the beginning of Part 2, but she only took over half her brain for some reason, so Yoru cannot control Asa when she's scared. This situation also allows the War Devil to feel emotions that are usually exclusive to humans, which basically means she's really horny. Much like the Control Devil, the War Devil has one main ability that all of her other abilities spawn from. In this case, that is weapon creation. Yoru has the ability to turn anything she possesses into a weapon. Originally, she had to touch an object in order to transform it, but as her powers have grown, she has developed the ability to transform things telepathically as well. In general, the worse Asa or Yoru feel about turning something into a weapon, the stronger that weapon will be. This was originally established with Asa's super strong uniform sword, when she turned her deceased mother's school uniform into a sword, and it was very strong. We've seen this ability create a ton of weapons over the course of Part 2, including the Aquarium Spear, the Room 606 sword, and the gun and tank gauntlets. These gauntlets are crazy. They're arms that Yoru used to replace Asa's arms after they were both cut up at different points in the series. And as the name implies, they were created with the Tank Devil and part of the Gun Devil. Because of the strength of these devils and Yoru's connection to them as a mother, these two hands instantly increase the devil's strength by a good margin. They allow Yoru to fire extremely strong bullets from her fingertips, similar to Makima's bang. And they also revealed that if Yoru turns a devil into a weapon, she can use contracts via that devil, as we saw her take advantage of a contract between the Gun Devil and the National Pistol Association of America, allowing her to turn the Statue of Liberty into a gun monster in exchange for 40,000 index fingers of the members of the association. This monstrosity was able to shoot around the globe, literally from New York City to Japan, and it was used in an attempt to kill the aging devil, which did fail, but it is a still example of just how strong Yoru can be. In fact, Yoru as a devil has grown a lot in terms of strength. At the beginning of Part 2, she was far weaker than she normally is, as part of her body was eaten by Chainsaw Man, and because humanity doesn't really engage in warfare anymore thanks to devils taking up their main focus. It is unclear if the lack of war is a result of Chainsaw Man eating Yoru, or if it just happened in tandem to being eaten and is a completely separate event. But over the course of Part 2, Yoru has experienced two significant power-ups. The first happened during the Chainsaw Man Church arc, when there was a small war against the transformed members of the Church of Chainsaw Man, increasing people's fear of war worldwide, and the second being the aforementioned gun and tank gauntlets. One interesting thing to note about Yoru Yoru is that it seems she might not be able to regrow limbs, as after Asa's first arm was cut off by Yoshida, it did not grow back at all, and after the other arm got cut off, she was forced to sacrifice her children to regain her limbs. This could be for a number of reasons, the most likely one being that the arm didn't grow back because Fujimoto wanted to give Yoru the weapon gauntlets, so it was just more convenient from a storytelling standpoint to leave them gone. An in-world possible reason is that Asa thought the idea of drinking human blood was disgusting, and Yoru couldn't control her into doing it, so they just never did. But another interesting possibility is that she truly actually cannot regrow limbs or part of her body in general for whatever reason. Maybe there's some metaphor here about the scars of war taking forever to heal or something, I don't know. At the beginning of part 2, Yoru's main motivation was getting Chainsaw Man to throw up the nuclear weapons devil to increase her strength by making humanity remember the fear of nuclear war. But recently, Asa said that Yoru is planning to do something worse than death to humanity. We don't know exactly what that plan is yet, but the concept is horrifying. Luckily, Yoru is kind of dumb, so hopefully this horror will not manifest. Interestingly enough, this means Yoru is the only one of the Horsemen to have truly evil intentions for humanity. That's not to say the others are good for humanity, but let's just compare their goals for a second. Makima wanted to protect humanity and basically keep them as a pet. This is a fucked up kind of safety, but it is still safety in some capacity. Famine wants to free people from their suffering via death, which makes sense for the Famine Devil, as we'll cover in a second. This, once again, isn't perfect, but it's not purely evil either. And then there's Death, who doesn't even seem like they want to be death or kill humans in general. None of these three want the worst for humanity, but Yoru seemingly does if it will make her more powerful, which I guess makes sense for a devil based on war. Anyway, we've talked enough about Yoru at this point, so let's move on to Famine. And I mean the real Famine. The Famine Devil is by far the horseman we know the least about, as they were introduced just a couple of chapters ago at the time of recording. She seems like a nervous and skittish girl who is overall pretty weak. This weakness is likely because the fear of famine is not super strong in the modern era. Obviously, it still exists, but compared to a couple of centuries ago, it's not a huge concern for humanity. With that being said, she's still a pretty strong devil, mostly due to her insane regeneration abilities. This ability comes from her main ability, life absorption. As the name implies, this allows her to absorb life from another living thing that she touches, and she then uses this life force to heal herself. As far as we know, this life-stealing ability works on both people and animals, as we saw her drain the life from a high school student and also a few ants. This also implies that the concept of the amount of life a creature has probably doesn't apply to this ability. The value of the ants was the same as the value of the human, despite them being different in almost every way and also requiring different amounts of energy to function. It seems like as long as another living thing dies, she can heal regardless of the value we assign to it. I wouldn't be surprised if the stolen life from this ability had other applications as well, but we haven't seen them yet if they do exist. In addition to this ability, Famine also seems to have confidence in her hand-to-hand combat abilities, but the fighting we see her partake in isn't particularly impressive, although she did land a hit on the strongest devil in existence, which has to count for something, right? As I mentioned earlier, Famine arrived with the goal of freeing humanity from their suffering via death. This, I'm not so sure I would call an end to suffering, but I do think this ability makes sense for the Famine Devil, as people who are suffering from starvation might view death as freedom from their suffering. Besides that though, we don't know much else about Famine. Currently she is enslaved to death, as she was just recently killed by death, which is the perfect transition to talk about our final horseman of the apocalypse, the Death Devil. First introduced to us as Fami, the Death Devil is the strongest devil in existence. She is so strong that even the primal devils worship her. This strength, of course, comes from humanity's fear of death, which is a fear almost all humans experience in some capacity. It was the first fear, and almost all other major fears stem from their potential to end a life. This Death Devil, though, has very little interest in ending lives, especially of humans. She has stated a number of times that she really enjoys human culture and that she wants to stop the prophecy from coming true for that reason. We still don't know much about this prophecy, but it is supposed to happen when the Death Devil reaches her full power, and it will plunge the world into the age of devils. Being the strongest devil, Death of course comes with a number of abilities, all of which range from decently powerful to completely broken. Her first and most notable ability is that she literally cannot die. Girl has 0 organs and her body is still fully functioning. Don't ask me how it works from an anatomical point of view, I don't know, it's just some Fujimoto magic. The inability to die isn't particularly new to Chainsaw Man, as both the primal devils and the hybrids are also also immortal, but this immortality is displayed differently. In the cases of the primals and the hybrids, their immortality comes from their regenerative abilities. They get diced up and then heal back to normal no matter how bad the injury. Death, on the other hand, is living without restoring her organs or fixing the enormous hole in her body. This likely means that Death's immortality is somehow different from the version of immortality we see in others, and it emphasizes that she truly seems incapable of dying. Her other notable ability is that she can enslave anything she kills. The control she has over a dead being seems to be absolute once she gives an order, and she's got some pretty strong devils in her control, including the Primal Devil Falling and her sister, the Famine Devil. I also think she might have Nayuta too, but this is just speculation. The most interesting of Death's pawns is, of course, the Falling Devil, as it raises some interesting questions. Did Death kill a Primal Devil, or did Falling allow herself to be killed because she follows Death? I think the latter is definitely more likely, especially since physical capabilities don't really seem to be Death's strongest attribute, but as the strongest devil, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of her killing a primal either. But that's not actually the last of Death's abilities. She has one more that's pretty easy to miss. She can heal people. We saw this when she healed Yuko during her introduction, and we haven't seen this ability be used since then, so we don't really know how it works or frankly anything else about it. But it is interesting that the Death Devil has a healing ability. It's also interesting because this healing also increased Yuko's strength and the physical size of her new form. In addition to these abilities, Death also implies that she has more abilities that are likely related to killing, as those are what will awaken on the day of the prophecy, so we will likely be learning a lot more of those in the coming chapters. In addition to these abilities, Death also seems to be fairly intelligent, as she was able to keep her fake persona without any suspicion. She also has no issue with lying to get what she wants, as we saw multiple times throughout part 2, so she seems to be somewhat manipulative as well. Lastly, I want to briefly touch upon why I think Death didn't confront or interfere with Makima during part 1. I think there are two potential reasons. The first, and far more likely reason, is that Death was okay with Makima being in charge. I can see this being somewhat likely, as Death obviously enjoys human culture, and under Makima's control, that culture would still exist. Makima also had the goal of eliminating Death too using Chainsaw Man, which kind of aligns with Death's goal as well. So in either case, Makima doing what she wasn't something that Death was opposed to. The other and far less likely reason is that she was scared of Makima for some reason or another. As I said, I think this is far less likely, but remember, there were a number of devils that wanted Makima dead, including the Darkness Devil, who we can assume serves Death in some capacity. This could mean Darkness was acting on the behest of Death if Death saw Makima as a threat to either herself or potentially the current state of human culture. As I said, this one is far less likely. You could even say it's pretty far-fetched, and I would probably agree. Anyway, I think that's all the information we have on the Horsemen of the Apocalypse in Chainsaw Man. If you enjoyed this video, maybe check out the Patreon. There will be a director's commentary on this video in the next couple of days where I talk more in depth about some of the theories I presented here and also talk about the production of the video a bit. I also want to do some Q&As over there eventually, but that probably won't be happening for a while. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next week for another video.